grabando, ¿verdad?
Arriba.
So, thank you all for coming. We are not able to do the fire here in the park for certain legal reasons, but so we'll proceed. And Prabhupada, actually, when I was temple president in Gainesville in 1971, and Prabhupada visited there, and he did initiations, and we didn't have time to do the fire sacrifice, so he gave the initiations and everything, and then after Prabhupada left, we did the fire sacrifice. So that is, so this is not my latest deviation. This is actually a tradition. So at this point in the ceremony, I'm going to explain something about Diksha. I've explained this many times before. Of course, the English word initiation means the beginnings, was the beginning of a new life. It's like this sense that when you complete a course of study or when you complete one period of your life, you're actually beginning something new, is also found in the common word used for a graduation, which is commencement. And of course, to commence is to begin. So, ¿sí? ¿Está funcionando? Ah, bueno. The word Diksha is, I once did a study of the word Diksha in the Bhagavatam, all the places in the Bhagavatam where the word Diksha occurs. And the result was very interesting. There's a study that in the culture of the Bhagavatam, the world of the Bhagavatam, the world 5,000 years ago was very different. For example, if you think about it, in the Bhagavatam and in the Mahabharata as well, we really don't see anything like organized religion. At least not in the sense that we have it today. We have, in the Bhagavatam, of course, there are very powerful traditions that people take very seriously. There are Shastras. So there's a shared culture that is disciplined and specific. But as far as an institution, what you call a religious institution, the institution was more or less just the society in general. It's very interesting. And of course later, by the time we get to Lord Chaitanya's time, 500 years ago, in India, we do find something like religious institutions. So the followers of Shankar form what you would call an institution, and the followers of Madhvacharya or the followers of Ramanuja. And although Lord Chaitanya had his followers, and there was, so to speak, discipline in the ranks, both the two kinds of discipline, which are philosophical and practice. In other words, like Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita uses the two words Sankhya and Yoga. Sankhya Yoga pratak bala pravadanti napandita. Only literally the childish in chapter 5 say that Sankhya and Yoga, philosophy and practice, are different. Krishna says, ekamapi asti tak samyag ubhayor vindate phalam. If you abide by, or if you stick to one very carefully, you get the results of both. Ubhayor means of both. Vindate phalam, you enjoy the fruit. So that's the terminology that Krishna uses, philosophy and practice. Sankhya Yoga. So then in Diksha, well, going back, if we look at the society 5,000 years ago, and then again Vaishnava or Vedic society 500 years ago, there are obviously dramatic changes. The idea that there's one absolutely, in all respects, down to the last little detail, unchanging Vedic culture, of course, is it's a little silly, because we have it right there in our Shastras. If you look at what was society like, what was religion like, how was it practiced 500 years ago, it's very different than it was 5,000 years ago, although the essence doesn't change. the Krishna consciousness is exactly the same. But externally, it's different. In fact, the very notion of Yuga Dharma implies that. But in any case, so just as 5,000 years ago, we don't really find in the Mahabharata or in the Bhagavatam anything like a religious institution, although there is a strict, disciplined religious culture, which has varieties. For example, people worship different gods, or they have different practices. Krishna talks about that. I mean, one of Krishna's main purposes in Bhagavad Gita, of course, ultimately Krishna is trying to persuade us to surrender to him, because it's in our ultimate rational self-interest. And Krishna presents it that way, but the way Krishna does that, if you read the Bhagavad Gita as a historian, you see that Krishna is addressing all these different options that are out there. When Krishna, for example, criticizes, as he often does, polytheism in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna says that those who worship the various demigods are really only worshiping me, but they're not really doing it properly, obviously that was going on. Krishna is not talking about things that no one had ever heard of. He's directly speaking to what's really going on. And so we know there was polytheism, we know that there was karma kanda, people exploiting religion to get material benefits. There was a lot of that going on. In other words, just human beings being as basically foolish as they usually are. In fact, Krishna even says in the Bhagavad Gita that evam parampara pratu imang rajar shayo vidu sakali neha mahata yoganashta parantapa, that the spiritual practice or the spiritual science has actually been lost, and Krishna is now going to revive it. So it's very interesting. If you read the Bhagavatam, especially the 10th canto, about what was going on 5,000 years ago, or the Mahabharata, which is, about the same historical period, you can take that, well, that's Vedic culture, but it is and it isn't, because Krishna says about that culture 5,000 years ago that it's lost its way. The actual spiritual science has been lost. So even the culture we're looking about 5,000 years ago is and is not Vedic culture. And it gets even worse. 500 years ago when Lord Chaitanya appears. Actually, he appeared about 530 years ago, but probably for the next 1,000 years we'll say 500 years ago. Someone will, eventually someone will figure out that time is passing, it's not 500 years ago anymore. Anyway, so 530 years ago Lord Chaitanya appeared, and he actually appeared in a very degraded civilization. So you can look at everything that was going on back then, that's eternal Vedic culture, but I think you have to think again. Some of it is, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of it isn't. In fact, think about the city that basically Lord Chaitanya grew up in, this typical degraded college town. Because Navadvip was an educational center. There was a center for it's known even to non-devotee historians that it was an intellectual center. It was a center of what is called Navanyaya, or the new logic. And think about it. To give one example of what a degraded college town, or just what a corrupt government they had there, take Jagai and Madhai. We always focus on the fact that they were so degraded, they were raping and killing and stealing, and then Lord Nityananda, by his mercy, Lord Chaitanya saved them. But there's another aspect of it we should pay attention to, and that is the socio-historical aspect of it. How could they do all these things and get away with it? How can you live in a city which is tightly controlled, because they had the Muslim ruler, they had there were soldiers. It wasn't a huge town. So how could you live in a city and rape and murder and steal and get away with it? Why weren't they in jail? Why wasn't why weren't they part of Lord Nityananda's prison ministry? So the fact is that it was a very corrupt society. It was a very corrupt society. So we have to be a little careful about assuming that everything we see 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago is eternal Vedic culture. First of all, we see things very different. We see a very different world 500 years ago and 5,000 years ago. And secondly, a lot of what's going on, Lord Chaitanya rejects. And a lot of other things he accepts only to fit in. Unlike some people I know, Lord Chaitanya actually tried to fit into his society. So just as societies and cultures change, if we look at what is Diksha in all of this, what is Diksha? For example, who initiated the Pandavas? Or who initiated... So it was a very different world back then. So let's look at the word Diksha, how it's actually used in the Bhagavatam. The word Diksha is used in the Bhagavatam to indicate a procedure, a process, which is performed to prepare a person to come into direct contact with God. And the way people contacted God in former ages was by performing sacrifices. And we know from the Yajurveda, the famous statement that Prabhupada quoted, Yagyo Vai Vishnu, that Vishnu is the sacrifice. So the idea was that if you followed all the procedures, which were extremely technical, at least for major sacrifices, they were like little home sacrifices, like little do-it-yourself yagyas you could do at home called Agnihotra. In fact, there are two different categories of Shastra. One is called the Griha Sutras, from the word Griha, home or house. And so the Griha Sutras talk about performing little do-it-yourself yagyas. You know, Brahman at home would do these. And they were very simple. And they would do this daily Agnihotra. But then there are the Shrota Sutras, which describe these very elaborate state rituals that were really, it's just like, you know, in America there's certain state ceremonies like a presidential inauguration or something. There's a lot of, you know, or a Independence Day parade or something in Washington. And so these great sacrifices were actually state-sponsored events, as we know. The government would pay large sums of money and they would be very elaborate sacrifices. And so the idea was, in both cases, as Krishna actually explains in the Bhagavad Gita, that it brought you in direct contact with the absolute truth. That's explained in verse 424 of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Brahmagnao, Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagnao, Brahmanahutam. You may notice the word Brahma occurring a lot. Brahma here means the absolute. So Krishna says, Brahmarpanam, when you make an arpanam, an offering. Arpanam means an offering. When you make an offering, here the idea is in sacrifice to God, then the offering itself becomes absolute, which we experience every day when we offer food. And, Hare Krishnas are sort of born foodies, and because we really care about our persona, and so when we make an offering, that's the idea that the food becomes spiritual. Krishna explains this in verse 424. Brahmarpanam, the offering actually becomes spiritual or absolute. Brahmahavir, and and also if you offer ghee into the fire, that becomes spiritual. Brahmagnao, and the fire itself becomes absolute. The Agni. The word Agni, which in Sanskrit will call fire, we have an English word from that word Agni, as you should know, the word ignite. Ignite, or ignition, is just English from Sanskrit Agni. So anyway, the fire itself becomes spiritual, and Brahmanahutam, and the person who makes the offering is spiritualized, and Tene Brahmaiva Tene Gantavyam, and the person doing this will surely reach the absolute by this, what Krishna calls Brahma Karma Samadhina, by samadhi, by complete focus on spiritual actions. So, because a properly performed sacrifice invoked and manifested the absolute truth in the form of the fire, the offering, the people, Everything became immersed in the spiritual atmosphere. Therefore, it's just like if you're going to a holy place, take a shower, put on clean clothes before you go. You don't want to show up all sweaty and dirty at a holy, at a sacred event. And so we not only have to clean our body, we have to clean the mind. So Diksha, you see, even though I'm aging, I still remember what the topic is. For now. So, Diksha is the process by which you prepare and cleanse and purify your consciousness for your encounter with God. That was Diksha. And so because people did that through sacrifices, which are a big deal in the Bhagavatam, they're all over the place. It's like there's just yajnas happening all over the place. And so, therefore, before this encounter, for example, I think Catholics, in certain times of year, they're supposed to avoid meat or something. What do they call that? Lent or something? Yeah, used to be. Anyway, so, for example, an example of a Diksha really would be the famous case of, in the Bhagavatam, the Payovrata ceremony, the milk vow, where a woman, before begetting a child, lives just on milk for a while. And the idea is, as we know, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in that famous verse, I think 259, or thereabouts, that Vishaya binivartante niraharasya dehinam, that when a conditioned soul fasts, like you don't eat, your senses are weakened, and your senses kind of retreat from the sense objects. But then, of course, Krishna says, Rasavar jang rasopyasya parang drishtvanivarte, but the taste doesn't go away. But if you see something higher, then even the taste for material life goes away. So, Krishna explains in the Gita that fasting, for example, is a quick fix, but it's not a permanent solution. If someone is like literally about to burn to ashes in the fire of lust, and you just like stop eating, then after a couple hours you're going to calm down. So it's a quick temporary fix, but it is a fix nonetheless, temporary as it may be. And so therefore in these dikshas, in these preparatory ceremonies, people would fast, or they would restrict their, what they ate in various ways, and they would perform other things. The whole idea being to raise their consciousness, to get them out of the bodily concept of life. You don't want to walk into some sacred sacrifice and you're like, you're looking at the ladies. If you're a heterosexual male, of course. So that's the idea. If you're not a heterosexual male, there's somebody else you shouldn't look at. But that's the idea, to perform this diksha. So just to calm yourself down and put yourself hopefully in a spiritual state of consciousness. So that was Diksha. Now, in Indian history, there was a great bhakti revolution, which began, many, many hundreds of years ago, but really reached its climax in the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. As we know, before the Lord comes down to this world, He prepares the world. It's natural. It's like before the leader of a big country goes to some other country, they prepare everything. Security and staff, and he doesn't just arrive, or he or she doesn't arrive like an ordinary tourist. And so before Krishna comes to this world, He prepares the world for His arrival. If Krishna came to this world and literally no one knew anything about devotion, like nothing, it would be a pretty stupid world to come to. And so Lord Chaitanya, before He comes, He prepares things. So we see in Indian history, if we can call it that there was a revival, even with the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita. There was a revival of devotion. Ramanuja appeared, and of course Madhvacharya, other acharyas. And so then Krishna came as Lord Chaitanya, and He had put in place enough, you could say, cultural infrastructure. Krishna had prepared at least South Asia sufficiently so that people had some idea what He was talking about. And there were people in the world who would respond. And so, but with this bhakti revolution, there was a reinterpretation of Diksha. The encounter with God or the divine was not simply something you did occasionally, like at the time of the harvest, because the great Vedic sacrifices, of course, like sacrifices in every other part of the ancient world, were based on the agricultural calendar. You know, there's a sacrifice for planting, sacrifice for bringing rain, sacrifice for harvest, sacrifice for trying to get over the indigestion from eating all the harvest, I guess. I'm not sure about that. So, anyway, everywhere in the ancient world you had this culture of sacrifice, and always based on the agricultural calendar, because people lived or died based on agriculture. So, there was a reinterpretation of Diksha. And Diksha became not merely an occasional preparation for an occasional encounter with God, but the idea was that you give your life to God. And you connect to God, and you stay connected, and you purify and develop and improve that connection throughout your whole life, so that at the end of life you simply go back to Krishna. So that's how Diksha, again, because Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that the real spiritual science has been lost. So in a sense, Krishna is keeping his word, reviving the ultimate dharma, real spiritual principle, by establishing that the spiritual life is not occasional. It's actually at every moment one should be connected to Krishna, to God. And by the way, Krishna uses the word connected a lot, dozens of times in the Gita. It's translated differently in English, so you may not know that's the same word he's using. But the word Krishna uses in Sanskrit is yukta. Prabhupada sometimes translates it engaged. The word yukta is from the same root as the word yoga, literally means connected. So the idea is that you always have to be connected to God. So with that higher understanding of Diksha, Diksha prepares you not just for a one-time encounter, but Diksha is a lifetime preparation for your eternal encounter with Krishna, to live with Krishna eternally. And so that's the understanding of Diksha, which is a higher understanding that operates in the Hare Krishna movement. Tip my hat to the Hare Krishna movement. So, that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing here. And I remember one time in Los Angeles, New Dwarka, I was sitting there listening to Prabhupada's lecture, and he said something very interesting. Because by that time, it must have been like 1975 or 76, ISKCON had grown very quickly, and everywhere Prabhupada went, especially Indian people probably, they were really praising Prabhupada, because, I mean, the Hindu society was absolutely astonished at what Prabhupada had done. It was like they considered it to be miraculous, because they're coming from a third world country which doesn't have much prestige in the world, especially back then, apart from hippies and New Age people. And to see all these Western people, and there wasn't really a New Age movement back then, so to see all these Western people, young people, Americans and Europeans taking to Krishna consciousness, so the Hindu society was just astonished, and people were praising Prabhupada wherever he went. So Prabhupada said that was going on, people were praising him. He said, I don't take the credit. He said, but if you must praise me in some way, he said, you can simply say this, that I'm sort of paraphrasing, I never tried to take Krishna's position. I never tried to, and I realized that Prabhupada was the only person on earth that could say that, and actually have it be a true statement. Because as I've pointed out many times, there's philosophical atheism, but there's also psychological atheism. One may be a philosophical theist and believe in God, but psychologically, emotionally, one may be self-centered. And so, all of us have our little self-centered moments when we sort of go fishing in the modes. So if at any moment that I'm kind of self-centered, I want attention for myself, then it's a type of psychological atheism. Because at that moment, I believe myself to be, or want to be, or I'm attached to being the center of reality. At least because obviously the reality in which I can be the center is very tiny. But better a big fish in a little pond, some people think. So that type of psychological atheism, where at a given moment I really feel myself to be the center of what's going on, I want attention, not for Krishna. Bhakti means I want attention for Krishna. I want Krishna to be glorified. And self-centeredness means I would like to be glorified, even if I want to be glorified as a servant of Krishna. But, a rising tide lifts all boats. So if Krishna is going to get glorified, then sure, maybe I can, take a little bit for myself. It's like if you're given some money and told to go buy something for the deities. Do you spend it all for the deities? You say, well, deities don't need all of this. So, what's a lousy 20% off the top? So it's just like someone who takes the deities' money and decides, well, I'm not going to spend it all for the deities. I'm going to take my cut. And so emotionally we can do that. We can actually preach about Krishna, or we can serve Krishna, but emotionally we could be taking some of the credit or some of the attention for ourselves. So who but Prabhupada could say and mean it, and have it be true, that I never tried to take Krishna's position. I never tried to be the enjoyer. I never tried to be the center of attention. Who but Prabhupada could say that? So, the idea of Krishna consciousness is, obviously we have material desires. If you have a material body, it is extremely likely that you have material desires. If you don't have a material body and you're a ghost, first of all, welcome to the program. And of course you also probably have material desires, because that's anyway. So anyone that has a material body, or who would like to have a material body, it's extremely likely they have a whole little toolbox of material desires. So, what do we do with them? One thing, philosophically, we should realize that, take lust, which Krishna calls the enemy, the eternal enemy of the conditioned soul. Basically what lust is, or greed, or any of these deadly sins as they're called in some religions, the idea of these desires is that I'm trying to take something that belongs to Krishna. Of course we've heard this a million times, but if we think about it, stealing is recognized as a crime everywhere in the world. People have different definitions of it. In America, in the modern American plutocracy means rule by the rich. Democracy means rule by the people, and plutocracy means rule by the rich. So, welcome to the brave new plutocracy of the United States. But anyway, so societies have different definitions. For example, if you're a multi-billionaire company and don't pay taxes, that's not stealing in America at the present time, for various historical reasons. But so the idea is that every society has different definitions of what it means to steal. But this does not prove, you could say, a strict moral relativism. This does not prove that morality is completely relative. It's not. Because what you find is a common thread. You find a universal principle in every society that stealing is bad. And even the definition of stealing is pretty much the same in every society, that taking something that doesn't belong to you and to which you have no right. Now, societies may define differently who owns what, and under what circumstances is it actually stealing to take something. There are, even among so-called first world countries, if you go to Denmark or America or Canada or Italy, you'll find different rules. But still, there is a universal principle which is being interpreted differently, and not so differently. There are differences, but basically the principle is that under certain circumstances, people and groups have proprietary rights over things in this world. Whether it's children, for example, you can steal someone's children because parents have a certain rights over their children. So whether it's other people under certain circumstances, or physical property, or there's intellectual property. For example, you may have the right to a certain idea or phrase or musical jingle or something. So, there's intellectual property, there's human property, as in the case of children. Or, for example, let's say someone signs a contract that some famous golf player, and I personally, worship golf players. I'm just kidding, I really don't, but I worship soccer players. Actually, I don't worship any of them, but let's say if some famous athlete signs a contract not to endorse any other kind of tennis shoes except, let's say, pastel green Vedic tennis shoes. Anyway, so he signs a contract, then that person actually legally cannot endorse other shoes. So you can have proprietary rights over the speech, over certain kinds of speech of individual human beings. So there's all kinds of proprietary rights over people's speech. There's proprietary rights over space, like you can't cross this line, over money, there's all kinds of rights. But still, every society recognizes in their own way that there is such a thing as proprietary right, and you can violate it, and if you do violate it, you are engaged in stealing something, whether it's an idea, a melody, a child, a house, a car. And so, but everywhere throughout, again, I mention this because we live in an age where thinking has practically gone extinct. With what was it, the cuckoo bird? What was that bird? Anyway, one of the casualties of our age is thinking. So it's not the case that every society has a completely different moral system. That's actually not the case. But anyway, stealing. Krishna actually uses this word thief, stena. In Sanskrit, the word is stena, where he says that if you receive and don't give back, you are nothing but a thief. In this case, he's talking about the demigods, not to speak of God himself. So even from the demigods, like for example, we're in this beautiful park. And it's really nice, kind of Vrindavan-esque. And the sun is shining, and there's water in the water fountains, and we have nice food and all that. So it's not just a freebie. There's this humanistic delusion that somehow the earth belongs to us. But actually it doesn't. So Krishna says if we take these things and don't give back, then we are stealing. So initiation, when someone makes a formal commitment, it's like, for example, you can audit classes in some school, you can take online courses, you can attend the occasional lecture. But if you actually want a recognized degree, you have to enroll in a college and do horrible things like homework and take tests. Something which I studiously avoided in my own academic career. But anyway, when you formally enroll in a college and you actually take the courses, then you get a real degree, and that degree means that unless you're like a really good cheater, the degree means that you actually completed a disciplined course. So you can't just, read internet articles on health and then become a practicing physician. So in the same way, getting formally initiated is something like that. It means not just occasionally auditing a lecture, not just occasionally doing this or that, but you actually want an accredited degree. You want to be recognized by Krishna as having successfully completed the bhakti course. And it obviously puts you on a much more serious platform in your relationship with Krishna. So it's not just some superstition like it's some rule that someone threw down from heaven. If you think about it, it's completely rational, it's completely logical. For example, let's say you like sports, so maybe on the weekend you get together with your friends and play this or that sport. But if you want to be a serious athlete, a professional athlete or an Olympic athlete, it's much more serious. There's a disciplined course. So it's the nature. It's interesting because if you read the Bhagavatam or the Mahabharata, people are always getting powers by performing tapasya. Demons, devotees. So what is this all about, this tapasya leads to power thing? This formula that you find in the Shastras. The way you could understand it in our society, in our modern world, is that if you want to really achieve excellence, if you want to really be good at something, you have to practice. You have to be disciplined. And that discipline is a kind of tapasya. For example, if you want to be a great concert pianist, like I'm not. If you want to be, it's like Pride and Prejudice, Emma always laments that she never practiced enough. Elizabeth Bennet also laments. Jane Austen must have not practiced enough because she has all these heroines that lament they didn't practice enough. But anyway, so if, let's say, all your friends are out playing and calling, hey, come on out, we're having a great time. No, you got to go, do your musical scales. Hey, la danita, eso te toca a ti. Or let's say someone wants to be an athlete, and so, while everyone's out having a good time, they have to exercise. They can't eat certain foods. They have to, get up on time and so on. So it's the nature of the world. That's the way the world is created. That you cannot become really good at anything without discipline and without practice. And the same is true with spiritual life. So the idea of sadhana bhakti is not just some eccentric idea that, popped out of this mystic culture. It's the nature of life itself. If you want to have a successful relationship, as we know, relationships take work because, can you imagine actually living? What's that Sarvatma he has on his refrigerator, one of those little magnet signs? It says, marriage means finding that one special person that you want to annoy for the rest of your life. So it's just a fact to have a successful relationship. It takes work. It takes work, and people who have the determination, the goodness to really work at the relationship, then they succeed in having a long-term relationship. And because people are very impatient nowadays and don't want to go to any trouble about anything, there aren't so many great relationships. Long-term relationships and hedonism don't go well together. So, Diksha, that's what it's all about. It means that someone wants an accredited degree in Bhakti Yoga that we recognize in the spiritual world. That's basically what it is. So that's Diksha. And I actually have responsibility to mention at this time, there are no refunds. You do get store credit with a Shiksha Guru, right? Shiksha Guru is like store credit. Anyway, any questions on these topics? Yes. ¿Qué tal? ¿Qué hubo te? A little louder, maybe? Actually, if you ask a question, you come forward and so everyone can hear it. And actually, you could even stand right here and be filmed. Be a movie star. Veng. This is your big break. Sí, dime. Oh, in English.
Sure. So, you mentioned that how Prabhupada said that, he never tried to take the place of Krishna. And so often we hear about gurus from ISKCON glorifying Prabhupada. So often, and so the younger generation's very fulfilled with that. But now we see gurus falling, and if you study the history of ISKCON, and someone can become hesitant about taking diksha from any guru, or gurus are, having their issues, and so someone
midlife guru crisis.
Yeah. So someone can.
Yeah, naturally that could lead to skepticism or doubt.
Yeah.
But I'd like to put the history in context. It's just like probably devotees will say for the next 1,000 years that Lord Chaitanya appeared 500 years ago. So devotees will also probably say forever that so many gurus fall down. Actually, when Prabhupada first passed away, and then I was one of the guinea pigs. I was one of the first gurus, what I call one of the Fab 11. And in terms of Prabhupada leaving detailed instructions, not the general thing of repeat what's in Shastra and practice Krishna consciousness, but in terms of detailed things, worship, not worship, seat, this high, that, all these details, the total number of detailed instructions Prabhupada left comes to 0. That's one point. So to say that a group of young people didn't get it right the first time, that's like amazing, But there were 0 details. Secondly, when Prabhupada left this world, at least externally, personally, I had been in the Hare Krishna movement 8 years, and I was 29 years old. Maybe a little spiritually precocious, but still 29 years old and 8 years in the movement. And did I know exactly what I was doing? Of course not. So that's the second factor. Number one, no detailed instructions on external things. Number two, because Prabhupada, everything happened so quickly, ISKCON grew so quickly, we were very young. And number three, because we were the first generation after Prabhupada of gurus, it's a tough act to follow. And also, no one had any other idea of what a guru is. Prabhupada actually had 2 positions that he kind of merged. Prabhupada didn't really make clear distinctions in practice, but he really occupied 2 different positions in ISKCON. One was as a Diksha Guru, and the other one was as the founder Acharya. As the founder Acharya of ISKCON. These are actually different positions. And the distinction, Prabhupada himself teaches in chapter 6 of the Nectar of Devotion, where he says that a devotee should follow in the footsteps of the great Acharyas under the guidance of a bona fide guru. Now, if you look at Prabhupada's statements about himself and the guru, these 2 categories kind of came together. And so, another thing is, at the time that Prabhupada left this world, he was the only guru I'd ever met that I actually trusted. First of all, obviously I wasn't going to trust some rogue guru, who's an impersonalist or teaching some whatever, philosophy which was not bona fide. But secondly, Prabhupada repeatedly trained us and taught us not to get too cozy with the Gaudiya Math. For the simple reason that from the very beginning of Prabhupada's mission, they were trying to take ISKCON away from him. They were trying to usurp Prabhupada's position. Not all of them, not all the time, but a lot of them, a lot of the time. And I personally witnessed some of this. You can read about it in the Lamrita. The most famous or notorious example of this was in 1970, when there was a formal plot to steal ISKCON from Prabhupada in 1970, which Prabhupada found out. I remember in, must be, 1975, 76 maybe, where we all of us, the GBC, us, here is the GBC, we went to attend some kind of program, as we always used to say, across the river in Navadvip, in the ashram of one of the most well-known godbrothers of Prabhupada. We went there, and We were invited because it was the festival season, it was Gaur Purnima season. So I went there, and I don't know what was going on. First of all, they were speaking Bengali. Secondly, it was way too hot for me. Third of all, as usual, in India I had what I call the Bharata blues, either a mild case of dysentery or something. So I didn't know what was going on. I was just kind of, waiting to find, when can we go back over the river and I can just like take a nap or something. But we got back from that program, and Prabhupada called us to his room. Prabhupada heard that we'd gone to this program. And he called us into his room, the GVC, and he said, what happened? And Tamal Krishna, who was like the great documenter, he had recorded it. It's funny, because we were very close, but he kept every email he'd ever received or sent. I delete everything, and so he couldn't believe it, that I didn't have all this documentation of everything. But so he had recorded the event, so Prabhupada wanted to hear it. We had cassette players then. So he turned it on, and at a certain point Prabhupada got disturbed and said, they are offending me. It wasn't the guru whose ashram it was, but some of the speakers were speaking in Bengali about Prabhupada in a way that Prabhupada found offensive. And so this was always going on. It was just like a constant thing with the people in the Gaudiya Math. I remember when Prabhupada, when he first went back to India, there was another offense against Prabhupada in how they received him at the airport. So this was constantly going on. His godbrothers, because here Prabhupada had gone and was saving the whole world, they had their little tiny thing, but I joined the movement before Prabhupada. It was that thing. It was like the pecking order. Or he used the word Prabhupada. He shouldn't. It was just constantly going on. So the result of all this, and this is the point I want to make, is that in 1977 when Prabhupada passed away, and then, later when I realized, oh my God, I'm supposed to be a guru now. When that happened, the last thing in the world I was going to do was go to the Gaudiya Math to find out how to be a guru. That just wasn't going to happen, based on the way Prabhupada trained me. And where else was I supposed to go? To Sai Baba? So the simple fact is that when Prabhupada left this world, he was the only completely trustworthy guru I'd ever known or ever heard about. I mean, the previous acharyas, of course. But then again, you can't jump over Prabhupada. We know that obviously Bhaktisiddhanta, Gaurkishore, they're liberated Vaishnavas. But again, we had the warning, don't jump over Prabhupada. So therefore, the way we were trained by Prabhupada, the only experience and knowledge I had of how to be a guru was Prabhupada. I had no other experience, no other information that I thought was completely reliable. And Prabhupada also used to always beat into our heads, don't change anything. So, if you have the, let's say, intellectual agility to think your way back to 1977 and early 1978, it wasn't just like madness, just mass insanity that we developed a certain system for the gurus. Furthermore, there are other points to be made because, you can listen to the mythical history of ISKCON, or some of you may be interested in what actually happened. So therefore things were done a certain way. Now there's another point which has to be considered, and that is Prabhupada's example, the way he conducted his own mission, and a style that led him to choose certain people and not others to be gurus, was that Prabhupada was the one-stop shopping leader. In other words, Prabhupada managed ISKCON. He gave the class. He was the philosophical authority, the administrative authority. When I took sannyas in 72, Satsarup also took the same time, and we both wrote Prabhupada letters. I don't even know if we consulted each other, but saying, oh, Jai Prabhupada, now that we're sannyas, no more management, we can just preach. And Prabhupada wrote back to me and said, who told you this nonsense? He said, do what I'm doing. In the morning I give the class, and in the afternoon I go to the bank. In other words, Prabhupada trained us to be leaders in every sense, because that was his. Now we know from the history of religions and the sociology of religions that when a religious institution becomes more developed, you do start to get more differentiation. You do get like a managing class and let's say a guru class or Brahmin class, that, the Varna system. But during Prabhupada's time, again, if you study just basic sociology of religion, Max Weber, etc., you know that in the early stages of a religious institution, those divisions are not very strong or not clear at all. So Prabhupada not only himself did everything, managed and preached, he taught us to do the same. And when he chose gurus, he chose not people who were just saintly Brahmins who gave good classes. He didn't choose those people as gurus. Prabhupada himself chose his gurus practically down to the last man. Sorry, it's just men. But Prabhupada chose, all the people he chose to be gurus were people who were successful preachers and successful managers. Practically all of us were GBC, and the one person who wasn't GBC, I think, or two, Bhavananda and Jayapataka, were made GBCs because that was the model. That was the model that Prabhupada personified. So if you think back to what the reality of ISKCON back then was, every GBC was absolutely independent, autonomous in his zone. For example, I was in charge of Latin America. And the last thing in the world that any other GBC would ever imagine doing would be to come to Latin America and just, mess with me. Because we didn't do that. No one ever did that. It was absolutely unheard of. It was absolutely forbidden to go to someone else's zone and, try to start exercising authority. And again, the choice of gurus was based on this model. They were GBC people. They were people who had independent, autonomous zones. So the fact that in that reality back then, at a certain beginning stage in the sociological development of a religious institution, the fact that people interpreted that, okay, then since I'm in Latin America and for years, under Prabhupada's order, I'm in charge of everything, so I'll be the guru there. And then we also have a statement from Prabhupada saying one advanced devotee is sufficient to make a particular geographic area Krishna conscious. So the idea that this notion that an acharya for a zone was somehow evil or based purely on the basest, the darkest of motives, or is against Vedic culture, is just idiotic. It's stupid. It may not be the best system for ISKCON today, but when that system was adopted, it did not violate any instruction of Prabhupada, it did not violate any ISKCON law, and it did not violate any scriptural injunction. So the idea that people performed duties which were sociologically natural and almost inevitable, which did not violate any societal law, any scriptural injunction, or any teaching of Prabhupada, and yet somehow it was an evil thing to do, is symptomatic of the mindless age we live in. But now, getting back to your specific point, when you have that set of circumstances, historical circumstances, where you have gurus who are very young, inexperienced, immature, but they were chosen because there was no one else, because ISKCON grew so quickly, and because it grew as a foreign culture. If you preach Christianity in America, if you preach, Hinduism in India, if you preach Islam in Saudi Arabia, the right kind of Islam, you can get a lot of followers because that's the culture of that area. But when you preach something which is very new and exotic and foreign, especially at that historical period, the late 60s and early 70s, it was entirely predictable you're going to get young people because of the counterculture going on and for many reasons. And then it grew very quickly, then Prabhupada quickly passed away. So yes, in that very difficult time, where, according to Max Weber, the famous perhaps he invented the sociology of religion, it was a period in which we were engaged in the routinization of charisma. The idea being that charismatic leader, and the word charisma is actually it's from like New Testament Greek. The word charisma means a special gift. So to have charisma means that someone has a special power, at least the followers believe that person has a special power that comes from God or comes from the divine, and therefore that person has ultimate authority. So even if the person, like you saw, these horrible cases of sort of the dark side of charismatic authority in the Ranch Dravidian community in Jonestown, or Rancho Santa, these horrible cases where people gave up all of their common sense, their human reason, their any notion of just what it means to be a civilized human being, and either killed themselves, or there was a group in Tokyo that put poison gas in a Japanese subway. So because a charismatic leader is supposed to be connected directly to God, a follower, sometimes when the follower has no common sense, or will just think that whatever this leader says supersedes anything like common sense, state law, anything, whatever I learned from my parents, it just supersedes everything. I'll do crazy things. Now, in the Hare Krishna movement, fortunately, we had a pure leader, so we weren't told to, put poison gas in subways or to kill ourselves, and just insane things like that. In fact, we were instructed to be ladies and gentlemen. But in our zeal, it's like, you go out to sell books in an airport. And so, the divine injunction to sell these books is way above anything like the law of the land. So you just use whatever techniques you can. You can lie, you can cheat, you can do whatever you need to do, because we are serving a higher law. And so that's obviously there are cases where you do serve a higher law, like, for example, hiding Jews from Nazis during World War II. So, there are actual cases where you should obey a higher law. And ultimately, your moral duty is not always exactly identical with what happens to be the law in a particular society. Nonetheless, you have to be very careful about these things. So, anyway, so ISKCON was quite immature. It was sort of like, because we were all young. So in that circumstance, where you have young people, immature people, and you have no tradition, because in the routinization of charisma, you have a charismatic leader. When that leader passes away, as inevitably happens in this world, the movement will survive. There's a little course in Sociology of Religion 1A. But a religious movement will survive upon the passing of a charismatic leader if it is able to, the sociological term is, routinize that charisma. In other words, you take that divine power, which was in the hands of the leader, and it has to be channeled into a rational, sustainable, institutional framework. Because for all the, bad opinions people have about religious institutions, if you don't have something like an institution, you don't survive through history. So, therefore, Prabhupada knew these things. Therefore, he said we should have a constitution. ISKCON needed a constitution. Something which the leaders of the movement are, a little slow on, and I'm writing a paper about that right now. But ISKCON needs a constitution. And if you think back to 1977, when Prabhupada passed away, the process of rationalizing, institutionalizing that powerful charismatic authority of the leader, it had hardly begun. It had hardly begun. And so this routinization or rationalization of charisma, it takes two forms. One is law, rational law, where you have a constitution or some set of laws which are fair, just, reasonable, and so leaders can't just do whatever they want. They have to follow reasonable laws. The other way you kind of sustain an institution or a society over time is through tradition. For example, in America, we have certain political traditions. So, playing a certain song when the president comes in, Hail to the Chief, it's not objectively like that, but it's a tradition. And so by playing that song, by hearing that song, people remain connected to a tradition and the force of time. It's like, it's like the force of a river or the force of a hurricane. History has a certain force. If you have 200 years of tradition behind something, it really, it makes that activity or that process or that law or that principle much more powerful. And so tradition plays a role in enforcing and reinforcing the customs, the laws, and the culture of a society. Which is why some people object so much to our appearance. But in any case, when Prabhupada appeared, not just because they're demons, there's something more going on there. Anyway, when Prabhupada passed away in 1977, November, ISKCON was still a society which was almost completely accustomed to functioning under charismatic authority, where basically you don't think, you just follow. Thinking, of course, was the fifth sinful activity for many devotees. So, in that atmosphere, when you have young people suddenly given this absolute power because all anyone knows about gurus is Prabhupada, there's no experience, and then they're put on these high seats, and then, if you've given all the sociological, historical circumstances combined, the fact that people had trouble, it was entirely predictable. So, the real point here, I think, is to look at what's happened since then. The fact that any sociologist of religion will tell you that when you're in that particular historical period of routinization of charisma, it's really rough. It's a very difficult time, and just like most restaurants go out of business, so do most new religious movements. Most new restaurants and most new religious movements. So, in that very difficult time, a lot of gurus fell down, which was very predictable. Since then, ISKCON responded in different ways, and I think if you look at the record for the last 20 years, you couldn't at all say that many gurus fall down. They're all, everyone has their taste in gurus. But, so that saying, it's just like for the next 1,000 years, people will say that Lord Chaitanya appeared 500 years ago. So maybe for another, I don't know for how many years are people going to say that so many gurus fall down when actually it's not the fact.
So
that's one point. And also, after the class, I'll give you my card, and we're offering specials this week. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so what can you say to young devotees out there who are still hesitant with taking Diksha, and for those that maybe have a guru and they feel like their guru's, maybe not
having, what do they call it?
What advice?
Okay. What advice for young devotees who are a little reluctant to take initiation or have a guru but are having kind of like, what do you call it, surrenderer's remorse or something? Well, that's understandable. I could give you a clever little saying like nothing ventured, nothing gained. But we have to avoid being irrational on one side or the other. One thing which has, how should I put it, in a movement which claims claims absolute authority, there's a real tendency to go to extremes. And you see it in some people. So on any road, you can go off on one side or the other. If you're afraid of going off the road to the left and you keep compensating, you obviously go off the road to the right. So you can be irrationally surrendered, but you can also be irrationally skeptical. You can have blind faith, but you can have blind doubt. So I think the real problem is being irrational, not thinking clearly. Whether you have, blind faith or blind doubt. So, also, gurus come with a warranty. Garantía. In the sense that, I mean, this may sound a little crude, but I'll say, it's like if you get married, and then the priest that married you turns into a serial killer or something, you're still married. So, the idea here is that if you accept a guru, and you've done due diligence, if you've been sloppy, you haven't done your homework, and you don't really know who this person is, or you're just like some gurupi, as I say, then it's your own fault. If you buy a car and you didn't check the reviews, you didn't check, and you end up buying a bad car, it's your fault, because you didn't do your homework. But if you're careful and you do your homework and you accept a guru who, to the best of your knowledge, is a bona fide guru. And in other words, a normal person with reasonable intelligence, having done a reasonable amount of investigation, would conclude this is a bona fide guru. And if you accept that person and then it turns out that I was wrong, there's no fault on your part and Krishna protects you. Because you acted. It's very interesting. For example, you can see there were some gurus who were extremely unbona fide. Like, there was one Indian guru in South India who turned out to be a gay pedophile. But a flaming pedophile. And did all kinds of things. And he was worshipped by millions, tens of millions of people as God. Now, what's interesting about this case from the point of social psychology, what's interesting about this case is that his followers who believed he was Bhagwan, thought he was God, actually did make spiritual progress. Or at least, for example, I read stories, because when the truth came out, it was very interesting, because many of his Indian followers stayed with him. No comment. But the Western followers tended to leave him, except this one crazy guy who was actually the founder and owner of Hard Rock Cafe, who, I read an interview with him, he said, even if he is a pedophile, he's still God. So, before I read this, I was not inclined to go to the Hard Rock Cafe. And now I have no inclination. But anyway, so the idea is that there is power in following a true principle. There is power in following a true, for example, if you accept the true principle that one should accept a guru who is representing God, or one should accept, for example, Lord Chaitanya came as a guru who was God, but so the principle of following a bona fide guru is a true principle. If you, in good faith, having done due diligence, la debida diligencia, if you accept a guru, then you are following a true principle, and Krishna will reward you for that. Just like we saw that there were many devotees in ISKCON who were following a celebrity guru that turned out to be not what they thought he was, but those devotees made spiritual advancement. They were empowered Vaishnavas. They preached. They had a strong spiritual life. Why? Because they were surrendering to a true principle. And another word for true principle is dharma. Now, if you should know that this person is not bona fide, and you're just ignoring, like the owner of the Hard Rock Cafe, or you just don't care. In other words, you don't respect the true principle. You are a gurupi. And no, when he looks in my eye and zaps me, it's so. A person who is like a cultish follower that does not respect the true principle will not make any spiritual advancement. And we actually find some people, even in ISKCON, accept bona fide gurus, but their attitude is so cultish, they don't really make that much advancement. They don't make as much advancement as a devotee who was following a guru who later fell down, but they were respecting the right principle. So it's very interesting. It's a whole subject matter of the power of true principles. For example, one family, this husband and wife, and they had some kids, they were followers of this South Indian guru. And when they thought he was the real McCoy, wherever that expression comes from. When they thought he was genuine, they became vegetarian, and they were from the Midwest United States, and they gave up their ordinary life, went to South India, traveled around, did, you could say, admirable humanitarian work. They were building schools for poor children. They were helping to feed people. They were really living, you could say, a very pious, virtuous life. When they found out that this person... Can you all come a little closer? Because... When they found out that he was a complete charlatan, it's very interesting. They went back to eating meat. And they moved back to the Midwest and said, to hell with piety. So, I mean, some people react that way. If they adopt a principle, but then find out that that principle was, you could say, personified, or the person who was supposed to personify or incarnate that principle was actually a fake or a cheater, they not only give up the person, they give up the principle itself. So those are the two extremes, I think you could say. One extreme is that you don't care about true principles, you're just a gurupi, you're just a cultish follower of some leader. Another irrational extreme is that if the person who I believed to personify this principle was false, I give up the principle itself. So, for example, eating in such a way that you do not commit barbarian cruelty against innocent, conscious creatures, in other words, being vegetarian, is obviously a true moral principle. It's obviously a true moral principle. And even if someone, as it turns out, someone just told me there was these two guys that opened up this small chain of vegan restaurants, they're doing real well, and then it came out in the news that they own a cattle ranch up in, Montana or somewhere. A meat ranch. So, obviously a lot of people no longer frequent their restaurants, but that doesn't mean that compassion toward other conscious creatures is a false principle, just because the person espousing it was a phony. So those are the two extremes: accepting an unqualified person or rejecting a qualified principle. So again, if you look at the whole history, as far as what I would say to a skeptical or doubtful or worried young devotee, I would say that you have to be rational. You have to know what you're doing. In accepting a guru, you are accepting someone who is or appears to be teaching and practicing true principles. So ultimately the bedrock, that which cannot fail you, is the true principle. Krishna or Prabhupada. I mean, those things can never fail you. So if you, in good faith, you did your homework, you made reasonable effort, you weren't obsessive about it, you didn't illegally put microphones and cameras in the guru's bedroom or something. But let's say you just made, you made a reasonable effort to understand the truth of this person. And therefore you made a rational decision. If it turns out that guru was not what you thought, there's no loss to you. Krishna's not going to punish you for what somebody else did wrong. It's like, for example, say you buy an airline ticket, and any reasonable person would have believed, based on the advertising, that these are the terms of this purchase. But then it turns out the airline suddenly says, well, no, actually something else. If the airline can show that they put up a reasonable number of warnings, or reasonable number of, the information, you just ignored it, you were in a hurry, you didn't see it, you're responsible. But if they didn't do that, then you're not responsible. So if you made a reasonable choice, and if it turns out, let's say, God forbid, the guru is not what you thought, you're not in danger. Krishna will protect you, and that's what we've seen it in real life. That's what happens. Krishna protects you. You don't lose anything from your spiritual life. It may be emotionally a bit difficult, but there's no spiritual loss on your part. So I think, there's rational fear and irrational fear, which is how Krishna talks about this in describing buddhi, which means reason or intelligence in the different modes of nature. In the mode of passion, someone's fears are somewhat, that's the word Krishna uses, somewhat irrational. And in the mode of ignorance, entirely irrational. Whereas in the mode of goodness, one's fears are completely rational. So I think if one has doubts, one has to see whether one's doubts are rational or irrational, whether they're reasonable or not. So, any other question?
Can you say, Maharaj, that in case of
ven aquí y habla a la cámara.
in case of
Cámara Cándido.
ISKCON as an institution is protected in the sense that we have varieties of persons who can guide
Yes.
someone else. So
Yes.
in this particular issue, it's not a
We have an ever-expanding guru menu.
right.
So, everyone can find something they like, hopefully. So, some gurus are very conservative, others are not so conservative. It just depends. So, but again, also, of course, you have to feel in your heart it's the right thing to do. But if you have faith in the true principles, Sanatana Dharma, and you make a reasonable effort to find out who a bona fide guru is, then Krishna will protect you. Anything else? No? Okay. Moving right along. Now we come to the initiation portion of our... so Sarah has... she's passed her credit check. Actually, Prabhupada used to joke sometimes. I was at initiation with Prabhupada in Los Angeles. And the movement was really growing. There was in New Dwarka in the old temple room, which was such an amazing temple room. But anyway, so Prabhupada came to LA and the movement had really grown, and so devotees came from all over, really the western United States and even farther. So there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of devotees, and there was over 100 devotees to be initiated. And so Karandar, who was GBC and temple president, he took all the beads and put them on the microphone stand, the kind of like the bar. So he put all these, there was like 100 sets of beads, and then he would call out the name and people would come up, and Prabhupada, he would really joke sometimes. I remember one time, Karandar called out, I don't remember if we used Bhaktin back then, maybe Bhakti and Elizabeth. So Prabhupada turned, I was sitting right next to Prabhupada. Prabhupada turned to me, and he said very seriously, "Is that Queen Elizabeth?" And one time in Rancho Park, we used to go to walk with Prabhupada, and there was if you know Rancho Park, there's certain low areas where when it rains or something, or when the irrigation doesn't shut off, you get like these little streams. So we came to one little stream there, and Prabhupada turned to us very seriously and asked if that was the River Thames. He would make all these jokes about England, but he asked if it was Queen Elizabeth. And it's funny because I started laughing, but other devotees, they didn't know, because they were so awestruck by Prabhupada, they didn't get the joke. So Prabhupada repeated the joke. And then like, you didn't get it. It's that Queen Elizabeth. So anyway, Bhakti Sarah, I've known her for many years, and she's known me. And so in a sense, actually, in accepting a guru, there's one of the processes described as pariksha, which means sort of mutual examining. You study each other, and pari means around. It's the Greek and English peri, like perimeter. It means around, Sanskrit pari. So it means in the sense of completely or thoroughly, in the sense of all around, pari. And iksha, of course, means just looking, like looking all around, really studying something. So that's the word pariksha. Parikshit, of course, was called Parikshit for that reason, because he was always searching for the person who had saved him in the womb. So he was searching all around. That's what it's called, Parikshit. Anyway, and so I'm very proud of Sarah, because she's very serious about Krishna consciousness. You know, I mean, for all of us in this age, there are obviously bumps in the road. But so that's just the nature of this age. It's Kali Yuga. But so, but she, for years, she's been determined and taken her own spiritual life very seriously, taken the process of initiation very seriously, and was really very conscientious, wanting to do the right thing, and now here we are today. So, where are the beads? I don't use a pink bead bag. This is serious. So you can come forward and so, good morning.
Morning.
So the word devotee is, of course, from the Latin devoto, which means of a vow. Vow, the word voto, we have the English word vote, like to pledge yourself to someone, vote for someone, or so that's where it comes from, votary. So to make a vow is literally to become a devotee in the original Latin sense of the word. To take that vow, that voto. You know, in Spanish, devoto, ¿verdad? Que vive devoto. So, there are do's and don'ts in the vow. We'll get the don'ts out of the way. So what are the 4 don'ts?
Don't eat meat, fish, eggs. No illicit sex. No gambling. No intoxication.
Yes. And positive?
Chant 16 rounds.
Every day of?
The year.
What are you going to chant?
Oh, Hare Krishna, Mahamantra.
Very good. So, your name will be Saraswati. Devi Das. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yes. Yes. Saras. I'll explain what the name means. Saras in Sanskrit means a current or like a stream. A current like in water, and vat, vat in Sanskrit means one who possesses, like Bhagavat, like in Bhagavad Gita. And of course, in the nominative singular masculine, it becomes Bhagavan. But anyway, so the feminine of that suffix vat is vati. It's not vadi, as we hear in ISKCON, like Bhagavati or anyway. So it's vati. Vati is just the feminine of vat. So saras vati means feminine, one who possesses saras, like beautiful currents. And so that's the river, Saraswati. That's actually how the word is formed. Actually, the word saras, I won't go into all the Sanskrit phonetics, but before consonants like the letter V, the saras is changed to saro. So then you get words like sarovara, like bindu sarovara. So sarovara is the same word, but just anyway, different phonetics. So that's Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Also understood sometimes as a consort of Vishnu or Brahma, and the supreme muse that inspires us with higher intelligence. So, at this point, maybe we'll ask Sarvatma to lead a kirtan, and while he's doing that, we can get down to the essence of all this and serve out the prasadam. You want this keyboard? Prabhupada ki jai.